Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode. If you could hide to Kolob podcast today, Clive, we've got a very special episode. We're here with Sister Carolyn Haynes, who is the Queensland Regional Church History Advisor. Sister Haynes has led a huge body of work preserving and recording the history of the church here in Queensland. And on the 24th of August at the Cleveland Chapel, there is going to be a video shown which steps through the history of the church. You must have a passion for church history. This hasn't. I'm assuming it's been a labor of love. I'm assuming that it's been enjoyable for you. Have you always had a passion of history? Like no one, the amount of work you've put together, no one puts that together unless they, I guess, feel that it's good, feel that it's right.
Yes, since you mentioned that to me last week, I've been pondering, where did I get a love of history? And I don't know. I think really it comes just from a love of the gospel, and I've lived it. Um, I I've grown up in the church, and so all of these things that we're talking about, Gibbon Street, I heard about all the time. My parents were baptized there. And when the first stake was organised, I was only 3, and so I've lived all that time through there. I've always enjoyed church history, learning about the pioneers and all of that sort of thing. And a librarian was my career. So maybe it's just more of the keeping of the records, and it's approached from that side.
I guess you've understood or you've appreciated more than most people just how important record keeping is.
Yes, I think so.
So the Gibbon Street is Woolloongabba?
Yes, a street in Woolloongabba,
Right.
and the chapel was built there, and it's just everyone just refers to it as the Gibbon Street Chapel or the Gibbon Street era.
That's the picture on the flyer, right?
Yes,
The
that's right.
and so there's 2 pictures. There's the bottom picture, and then there's the top picture, which the one on the left is the same chapel. What about the one on the right? That's the same?
Okay, the one on the right is actually the same chapel after it was sold and used by a different church, and they had a reunion there in 1979,
Right.
and they're the people that went to the reunion.
Was it members that moved to Queensland, or was it revelation to send missionaries here first? What's Adam? What's the start?
I think some missionaries came in around about 1850-ish, whatever, and they were here maybe for a little while and found nobody and went home, went
Right.
back. So they must there was only one mission there, then it was the Australia-New Zealand mission. Around 1893, 2 elders came from Melbourne. They decided to come to Brisbane, and they came by ship.
They were sent to the Australia New Zealand mission, and then part of that at some stage they've gone, okay, we've established something in Melbourne. We're going to travel to Queensland.
Yes, I think here it is. They were labouring in Victoria in 1890 when they felt impressed to travel north to Queensland.
Wow.
Because it was all one
Yeah.
mission, the whole country. Yeah.
And how good are the records? Do we know who they were?
Oh,
We
yes,
do.
Elder George Woolley and Almono Young. We don't have very good photos of them, but we do have kind of scratchy photos of them.
So who's William Duffin?
William Duffin was the first member that they found. So they were just about to give up and go back, but they discovered 3 people who had been baptized in England and immigrated to Australia. And that was William Duffin, his wife, Sarah, and their neighbour, Betty Leach. I think the missionaries had a street meeting or whatever, and the Duffins went
Yeah.
because they'd been praying for missionaries to come. And so that's how it started. And by 1896, they had about 70 members, and the branch was organised.
From all of these came from these missionaries?
Well, they must,
Well, it was these missionaries that led the work.
that's right. I'm
That-
not sure how long they were actually there.
Yeah, but I mean, talk about the field being ripe. When they did it, they would have established a sacrament reasonably quickly.
They met in the Duffins' home. They met in a few different halls that they rented.
And are all of these places gone now?
Yes, I think
It's
they
a
all
while
are.
ago.
Yes,
Oh
yeah.
my goodness. So by 1896, there's already 70 members. in
Yes, in
Queensland,
Queensland.
all meeting in Brisbane at the Duffins home or separate halls. Okay. And you talked about earlier when we were chatting that there was just one mission. What there was just one mission through the whole thing. So would it have been the missionaries charged? Because they wouldn't have been able to write letters to go back to Salt Lake and say, "Hey, we've got 70 members. Where do you want us to go?" They would have probably have just traveled around, or maybe more missionaries would have got sent.
Well, they would have had the mission office was originally in Victoria, in Melbourne.
Okay, so mission president in and had missionaries around.
Yes,
Ah,
yes.
I
It
didn't
wasn't
realize
it
it was.
was a bit organised.
Yeah, I didn't
Yeah.
realize it was so well established so early. Um, yeah, that's what I didn't realize, just how early it was.
1890, says here the mission president was Angus Wright, or then John S. Bingham. And so, yeah, every few years there's a new mission president.
Yeah.
But John Murdoch was one of the first mission presidents in the Australian mission in 1851.
51. So that's so the pioneers haven't even finished, right? In
No, that's right.
1851,
That's right.
the I okay. I wonder if that was if Joseph Smith had anything to do with it before his martyrdom, if he said we need to head to Australia, or it was Brigham Young who said we need to head to Australia. That's super interesting. I wonder what the revelation was, or who, because I mean it was either one of them. It would, and if it was Joseph Smith, it would have taken, then it was sort of 5 years later, but they would have had to have boarded ship.
Well, there is a quote by Joseph Smith, and he talks about sending missionaries to New Holland. Includes that in all the thing. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. So Australia was on Joseph Smith's mind.
Yes.
That's
The
unbelievable.
whole world was.
So the church is established. What were you? 1896.
1896, the first branch was officially organised.
The members. It gets to a point then, because there's 70. It gets to a stage where they say, "Hey, we actually need somewhere to go."
Yes. By the turn of the century, they had a sort of it was a building. The missionaries had rooms there where they lived, and there was a big room upstairs where they would hold meetings, sacrament meeting and Sunday school and different things like that. So it says by the turn of the century, the branch had almost 130 members.
130 members and still meeting in Brisbane.
Yeah.
And I mentioned this to you, this Conrad Trust.
Yes.
Like, so what I know of Conrad is, so my wife, Conrad is my wife's, I'm going to say maybe 3 greats or 4 greats grandfather
And he joined the church in Toowoomba.
in Toowoomba, right? So his story was, they would cross rivers or something,
That's right.
Elisa's nan will watch this and she'll be spewing that I don't know enough about it, but she gave me some wonderful information, and Conrad Trost sort of, he was a bit of a pioneer, I think, in that area, and then he ended up getting to Gibbon Street because I think him and then his family were baptized in Gibbon Street, and perhaps he even
Yes.
helped build it. Members helped build it.
Well, yeah. So he would have been there maybe in the 1910 to 20, that time period.
Yeah.
I think he came. I actually was reading some of his journal. I had a page out of it. I can't remember the year that was on. He talks about being ordained when he joined the church, and then he was ordained a deacon and a teacher and a priest. He has this in his journal. And that was like in about 1912, 1915, around about that time, I think. But what I do know about Conrad Trost is he was responsible for building the font
The
at
font.
Gibbon Street.
Yes. Okay. So so he built the font, and that was a really special memory and a special thing held in the family.
And so that was in 1930.
Oh, right. So baptisms were in Brisbane River?
Eckerburn Creek, I had read somewhere where someone else was baptised at Lota. Yeah, so it was wherever.
Build a font straight away for any particular reason? They didn't have the skill set early on?
Well,
They
they
didn't need
might not have thought about it. The way Gibbon Street Chapel, it's a very simple building. So if you look at the front of it, it had steps going up the side. You went inside and there was the chapel. And behind there were a couple of bedrooms where the missionaries slept. There was an attic upstairs where the missionaries slept once it got bigger. and they used these rooms for classrooms. There was a bit of a kitchen out the back. So that was the chapel. It was not very big. So they had a pulpit at one end. The baptismal font was actually underneath there. So they lifted up the floor and the baptismal font was underneath.
That would have taken a bit of engineering.
Yeah, it was concrete font was built. And so when they needed to fill it, they had to run a hose from the kitchen or the chip heater. People won't even know what a chip
No,
heater
I was about to
is.
say, what's a chip heater?
And I couldn't even hardly tell you,
Okay.
but it wasn't a wooden stove that heated the water. They had to run hose over the floor into the font.
And
And
so did they have to pull up floorboards
yeah,
and, like, literally lift?
they had well, it was like a trapdoor thing.
Okay,
So they lifted that up. That's how they had baptisms.
sure.
And of course, so you didn't have a baptism just every week or whenever. Even the children, when they turned 8, they'd wait till there was a group of them and they'd have the baptisms on Saturdays or because it was such a to-do to fill it up and then empty it. And
So in by this stage, I hope we're not skipping too many detail, but by the time they're doing baptisms, is it a ward now? Is there a bishop?
no, there was no stake.
There was no stake. Okay.
So it was all mission. So it was district and branches.
Okay. And do we know who that branch president was? Do we know their names at all?
They are all somewhere
Okay.
because they kept mission records.
Because I was just wondering if anyone's descendants, like, all these families, the trust, for example. So, all these families are still floating around now.
Well, that's right. So for a lot of times it was missionaries that ran the branch. Missionaries did everything. But in 1929, the mission president there came to Brisbane and organised actual members to run the branch. So the first native-born branch president there was Archibald Campbell, and that was in 1929. And he had to have counsellors, and so they ran the branch. And I think mostly from that time on, it was members running the branch.
What type of material did they have? Because I know when the church was established in England, there was, there was, I think it was like a British hymn book, wasn't there? Yeah, and pamphlets that were made there, because obviously the members knew zero. Was there any, like, I mean, I don't know if anyone would have got a first edition Book of Mormon, but there was Book of Mormon's been produced, so they must have come out. And was there enough? Did anyone get given Book of Mormons, and how did all of that work?
Well, the missionaries would have had to bring all of that. It would have come from the missionaries and through the mission office. So the mission would have ordered supplies and things like that. But do you think the mission
Yeah.
president was like a stake president? So he would have to organise all of that.
And he was still in Victoria at this stage?
At some stage, they moved to Sydney.
Okay, so as in the church's headquarters moved
Oh,
to Sydney.
yes.
Okay, so at some stage, church headquarters go to Sydney, and they're ordering Book of Mormons from Salt Lake. They're ordering hymn books. They're ordering Sunday school manuals.
I almost bought with me some old hymn books. Like I've got one from about 1909. And for Mutual too, they had different songbooks and stuff, but it was all from America.
You did make the last part that a few of the members ended up moving to America. Did that affect the growth of the church for a while?
It did for a while. And I think more people maybe from Sydney and Melbourne went, not so much from Queensland, although there were some families that went. Parts of families might have gone.
Okay,
Like, I think, like with the Orth family, they were a pioneering family, and some of the children moved to America, and some are still here, and their descendants are here too.
right, okay.
The Archibald Campbell, so he's connected to the Mora family. So you might know Elder Mora.
Yeah, Elder Mora, yeah.
Yeah. So Archibald Campbell is his great grandfather.
Okay, so what year are we at? We're at
We were at 1930, but the chapel was built in 1904.
1904. Okay, 1904, the members finally get somewhere to go and worship that isn't at someone's house. And it's ran by the missionaries. And then in 1929, the first branch president, Archibald, is called. and he will then subsequently call counselors. And so the church is then really organized and can stand on its own 2 feet without having to rely on missionaries.
Well, the missionaries were still a big part
Right.
of the
But
branch. Some of the people we interviewed on the video, so they, let me think, they were born probably in about the 1930s.
okay.
So the time period that they're talking about is 30s, 40s, and 50s.
Right.
Um, and things like they were blessed by missionaries, they were baptized by missionaries, not necessarily their fathers, like we would do today. Or even sometimes they were blessed or baptized by one of the branch presidency or one of the leaders rather than their fathers. It was just a
Gotcha.
little bit different.
Yeah. Okay. So the missionaries are really still a vital part to the ongoing
Yes.
organization of the gospel here. Okay,
Yes.
that's interesting.
Do we know if Australian missionaries were going around at this time?
When President Lillenquist was the mission president in the 50s, he started calling Australians to serve in Australia. And one of the sisters that we interviewed, Sister Val Croucher, who was Val Campbell, she was the first sister called in Australia, and she served in Australia.
Wow. And where was her mission?
Mostly down south in Victoria. I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that would have been the most densely populated place at the time, right?
So there were quite a few of the young people, sisters and elders, who were called to serve in Australia. And that really, I think that's started to really establish the church and the leadership and everything in the country. So that was in the 50s that sort of started.
So the church has been established. Missionaries are now going out. Is it still Gibbon Street, or do we now have? I'm not going to say lots of chapels. Is it just Gibbon Street still?
Right up to the 50s, it was still Gibbon Street. In Nambour, there was a branch established, or in 1936, they had a building that was their chapel.
So there's members are starting to be established up there on the Sunshine Coast area.
Pioneering family up there was the Atkinson family.
Okay. And they moved from Brisbane? Or
No.
the missionaries found them?
Yes.
It's a big trek for
Missionaries
the
from
missionaries
there.
back then.
And there was a branch established at Ipswich.
Right.
My parents actually joined the church in Ipswich in 1951. They came to Gibbon Street to be baptised. So when they were then driving home with the missionaries who baptised them, and there was another family who joined the church at the time, they discussed, wouldn't it be great if we had our own chapel? A week later, they had a building committee organised.
Oh, wow.
I know, it's like,
I mean, talk about getting on with it.
and they started building their own chapel. They raised money and bought land, and the members themselves would work every Saturday and holiday and building the chapel. Well, that was in 51. In 1955,
Yeah.
President Mackay came out to Australia. So he was the first prophet to visit Australia, and he travelled all around and visited the different places. He laid the cornerstone for the Ipswich Chapel. And after he then went back, the church building program became established in Australia. And so then the church sent out building supervisors and more chapels started being built. And that's when a lot of chapels, I think they built 14 chapels over the next 2 years or so, all throughout Australia.
So President Mackay had seen the work at Gibbon Street and then goes back and goes, the work is growing. We need to put something in place. The work is growing massively in Australia.
So by 1957, they had the chapel in Toowoomba was built. The one, 50 would be 56. The chapel in Ipswich was built,
Yeah.
finished.
Is that there now?
No,
Is the block there now? Is it a paddock?
it's
Is
a road.
It's a road.
It's a road, yeah. And so Toowoomba Chapel was finished. So the Ipswich Chapel was finished off by the church building program, and then Toowoomba was built. Then Camp Hill was called Coorparoo Branch, was built in 57, and Kangaroo Point, the Stake Chapel, then was built in 58. And that's when the members moved from Gibbon Street to Kangaroo Point.
That's amazing. Well, I'm super excited to see the video.
But we're excited that it's finished.
So the video's done, and we're seeing that on the 24th of August at 3 p.m. at the Cleveland Chapel. So that's going to be really exciting. And do people have to register for that? Do they just rock up?
No,
turn
they
up?
just come.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you for your service, and thank you for spending time with us. That's all we've got time for today. Thank you for tuning in to If You Could Hide to Kolob podcast, and we will see you next week. Thank you.